Hey, one quick heads up before we get into today's riveting conversation with Eric Maddox, who is the interrogator whose techniques and information led to the capture of Saddam Hussein. During our interview, Eric's Wi-Fi was cutting in and out, so there's some sound quality issues that are not up to the standard that we like to typically provide to you in the show, but it will not get in the way of you hearing his incredible story. So we apologize for that, but let's get into today's episode. Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. These were the words spoken by Paul Bremer, head of U.S. occupation in Iraq, on December 13th of 2003, after the successful capture of one of the world's most elusive terrorists, Saddam Hussein. But for the years leading up to that crucial moment in American and world history, America's special forces searched desperately for Saddam Hussein without much luck. But fortunes for the pursuit of intelligence to capture Saddam would change when a young and very green Army negotiator stepped off a plane to help. And that man's name was Eric Maddox, and he is our special guest on today's show. Upon his deployment, Eric quickly found that the interrogation training he received in the military proved ineffective in the field. And so he developed his own strategy predicated on what he calls empathy-based listening, the structure and details of which you will hear him unpack on today's show. So in this episode, you will have the distinct pleasure of hearing Eric retell the play-by-play story of the interrogations that led to Saddam Hussein's capture. And guys, it's incredible. You're going to love this journey that he takes you on. Now, Eric has conducted over 2,700 interrogations in 25 countries around the world, and he shares what he's learned about the most effective forms of listening in order to provide influence. And Eric has taken those skills and created a training program which he calls empathy-based listening, which he now delivers via keynotes and corporate workshops to the banking, insurance, wealth management, medical, and non-for-profit industries. And he shares some of those powerful techniques with us on the episode today. So you guys are going to really love this episode. And you know, one thing that we didn't capture on the audio, but I asked Eric after we finished recording, I said, Eric, you've been telling the story thousands of times over the last 17 years. How do you not get bored telling the story over and over again? He's like, Dominic, I love that you asked this question. He said, have you ever been interrogated? Have you ever been in a situation where you've been imprisoned or, questioned by the police? And I'm like, fortunately, no, I haven't. He goes, so one thing I learned in interrogating over 2,700 people is that interrogation process is the single most intense experience of their life. And I need to go into every single one of those 2,700 interrogations matching the intensity of their experience. Otherwise, I won't break them. Now, even though I've given the speech thousands of times and told the story thousands of times, it's the first time you've heard it. And I need to match the intensity of your listening in order for you to feel the full power, full weight of that experience. So that's the intensity that I bring each and every time I tell that story. And guys, I can tell you for a fact that you will feel his intensity. You will feel his fire burning as if he's told this story for the very first time. So I know that you will enjoy this episode. Listening skills from the interrogator who caught Saddam Hussein, featuring Eric Maddox. Eric, there is so much wisdom for you to unpack for us today about how to be an empathetic listener, your stories from your past about how your interrogation techniques helped to capture one of the greatest villains of our lifetime, Saddam Hussein. But before we get into any of that, one of the things that we unearthed from a video that you have on YouTube is that one of your proudest moments was witnessing your son, who in ninth grade, I think you said went 1-21 on the wrestling team, won one match, lost 21, and he stuck with it. And by his senior year, he not only became captain, but he made the States. How did you raise such a strong man with perseverance so deeply rooted inside of him?
I don't know that I take any credit for how I raised him. I give credit to his entire family, but I was so proud because he is my son, and just his ability to not quit, his ability to look at a challenge, identify what he can do better, to stick with it, not make excuses. And just watching that, I really wish I could take credit. I'll take credit for finding Saddam Hussein, right? I'll take credit where credit's due. I cannot take credit other than the fact that he knows I love him. I'm always there for him, but he has a wonderful mother. He has a wonderful family, he has siblings. So I certainly don't take credit for that, but I'm still darn proud.
I got to say, that story that you just told about your son, about the perseverance and fighting through and figuring it out, sounds pretty familiar after hearing your story. So it came from somewhere.
Yeah, we're going to have to dig into that, Eric. Let's just set the stage, because I know that our listeners are going to be super fired up to hear your story about how your interrogation techniques, against all odds, right? Like the CIA didn't believe that you could do it, found Saddam Hussein. But maybe even to set the context for today, other than our listeners getting a really cool story, like you are an expert in teaching empathetic listening. And for those of us who are not going to go capture, the next greatest villain of our lifetime, why is what you're talking about, empathetic listening and listening for insight versus information, why is that so important to men who are in business and men who are in relationships?
Well, empathy-based listening, that is the technique I use to interrogate to gain cooperation from these prisoners. But the cooperation came from this level of trust that had to be built. It had to be built at the highest level. It had to be sincere. It had to be enduring. And the only way that I was able to do that was the way that I communicated with them. So we think about how we want to tell people things, reasons why they can trust us. And what I'm going to argue is what we're telling them is, here's the value that I can give to you. But trust, true trust, has to come to understanding psychology. And it's the psychology that each of us individuals, we're the main character in our own movies. Naturally, we're all going to be selfish and self-centered. So the highest level of trust while communicating is saying, I care more about you than I do myself. And there's really nothing that anyone would expect us to care more about than ourselves. But when we communicate, when we show, when we demonstrate, this is about you. Well, how do we do that? The only way to do that is you got to remove your distractions. You've got to seek to understand the perspective of the individual that you're communicating with, minus your own agenda, minus your biases, to truly understand their needs. Now, once that occurs, this amazing thing where the person you're talking to says, whoa, you're making this about me, not yourself. Now, I want to empower you. Eric, I want your resources to help build this team to come together. And that is where you actually gain maximum influence, is they say, I trust. Now, not that you're capable. We can prove our capability when we talk, but we want to prove that we're putting them ahead of ourselves. It is actually the highest level of trust in a relationship.
I love what you're talking about here, because I know, like we were saying before we started recording, that you've read my book On Purpose Leadership. And what I talk about in that book is people will resist your leadership if they distrust you. It's the number one reason, right? The number one reason for resistance is they distrust you. So everything we're talking about here is the highest level of trust while communicating. So especially for leaders who are listening to this episode, you're going to be giving some like real specific hows on how to build that trust while communicating.
That's right. And what I love about when you say they're not going to follow you unless they trust you, the problem is we misunderstand what that level of trust needs to be. And we think, well, I run an integrity-based company. Well, integrity says you're going to do what you say you're going to do. But even if you do what you say you're going to do, if what you're doing is for your own goals and you're using them to fulfill your own goals, there's still a distrust there. It says, you know what? You are going to do what's right for me only as it serves you first.
Right.
And I say a great leader says, no, I'm going to identify and address your needs first, and then we'll address mine.
Love it.
Eric, maybe provide a little context for this background around Saddam Hussein. And the point that I'm really interested in understanding is the point where you realize the existing tactics, what you had been taught, isn't working anymore? Because that's where things, I think, the whole story's freaking interesting, but like, that's the point of like change and where you really jumped off into a different paradigm.
Sure. So I was in the military. I was a trained interrogator. The way that military works, if you're a trained interrogator, they teach you a foreign language. They taught me Chinese Mandarin. Well, and then the military decides, hey, Chinese Mandarin is so valuable. They were using me as an intelligence collection officer against the Chinese. I was never going to war. I was never going to Iraq. Well, I got pulled, had never been to war, never actually done an interrogation, even though I'd been trained, get stuck with this Delta Force team in Saddam's hometown of Tikrit because I had an infantry background. I used to be a paratrooper. I had graduated the Army's Ranger School, and they said, we want that type of person with this Delta team. No expectations that I would be more effective as an interrogator because I had received the training. So I was just going to be a regular interrogator. Brian, when I started to use the Army's interrogation techniques, they did not work. And I thought, maybe it's me, right? So we have to discover. That's the key when we're addressing, we want to get better. We have to discover and say, what is the actual problem? Well, the prisoners weren't cooperating. Well, was it me? And I went around to ask the other interrogators. They said, Eric, none of the prisoners are cooperating. And I started to realize, then what is the variable? They didn't give us these techniques because they didn't think they would work. The military interrogation techniques were based on a battlefield. We were going to grab the enemy. They're going to be in a uniform with a smoking gun in the government's military. These were insurgent fighters. They weren't part of the military. During the day, they had a job. And at night, they were fighting against us. And the difference was this. When we would grab a soldier of the enemy country's military off the battlefield, there was no plausible deniability of what they were doing. That debate did not take place. When we grab an insurgent, they looked like anybody else. We had no true evidence. So that plausible deniability that they had gave them hope. Now, the Army technique, I said, okay, now I've got this hope of the prisoner that I'm supposed to crush. I said, wait a second, why am I crushing hope? Hope's so powerful. When somebody has hope, they have power. They have the hope to be released based on presumed innocence. So I said, wait a second, the Army techniques teach you to kill hope. To say, I know everything about it. It's just called the we know all approach. We know what you've done, A, B, C, and D, break their spirit. Well, it wasn't working. And I said, why don't I use their hope? And I started to realize, wait a second, can I get them out of here? Can I get a prisoner released? I did the research and I said, yes, if I can get them to a certain level of cooperation where they provide enough information against the enemy, we capture enough people, my commanders will go, they're no longer against us. They're no longer the enemy. And we don't want to burden our prisons with additional detainees. I can get them out of here. So I said, let's take the existing hope they come in with, a plausible deniability, and let's fuel that towards getting them released based on their cooperation. That's the moment where I said, here's the old way. Here's why it doesn't work. Here's the opportunity for a new way. I didn't know how I was going to get that cooperation, but I at least said, don't try to kill the hope. Try to build on that hope because that hope is power.
So this is really interesting. It's going from an old paradigm of crush, command, control to actually now we're working with one another. If you're leveraging their hope, like you're not taking something from them, you're actually leveraging something that they want to maintain. So that's a radical shift in interrogation techniques. What does an example of working with someone's hope look like in that environment?
I'll give you a quick example, okay? Prisoner comes in, they're an insurgent fighter. What does that mean? That means there's groups in whatever village they're in that are against the American forces, and they'll lay improvised explosive devices or shoot rockets into the base. They'll just have their little posse. It's just kind of a ragtag group, but that posse has a leader, and then that leader has a bigger leader, and it's kind of like a network, right? Most of these teams, they're related. They have brothers and relatives. So I'll bring in a prisoner, and remember, they like, hey, I haven't done anything. You don't have any evidence. So what I typically do is I'll say, you know what? If you haven't done anything, you wouldn't lie to me, right? Eric, I wouldn't tell you a lie. Good. If you're innocent, I'm going to get you out of here. Matter of fact, I'm going to get you out of here today. I need to ask you some questions to prove that you're innocent. Eric, I'll be honest. I said, you don't tell me a lie, you walk out that door. They say, great, ask me anything you want. I said, but if you tell me a lie, you're here forever. Great. I just said, here's the deal. So now I'll interview them and say, well, you've got to answer these questions. I'll ask them about their friends and family. And what I realized is that when people want to hide, let's say their brother is in the insurgency, they're going to tell you 95% of their life accurately. And they're just going to omit the existence of what would get them identified in nefarious activity, the existence of a brother. So I'll ask them about their friends and their life, and I won't do a chronological or even a reverse chronological order. When I gather this information, I'll kind of move around. And what I realize is I can put the paint of a person's life on a canvas. And if you listen, minus any distractions, you realize they'll leave smudges, they'll leave gaps. And then I can identify those gaps and I can question them into corners. And if a person says he has 3 brothers and I've realized he's got a 4th, and then I'll say, what was our deal? And they say, Eric, you said if I didn't tell you a lie, you'd release me. And I say, how many brothers do you have? And they say, I have 3. And I say, you have 4. And they'll be like, oh my goodness. And I say, what was the deal? What was the deal we just cut? And inevitably they'll go, can we cut a new deal? We got to cut a new deal. And so what I do then is I don't want to punish them for lying. I want to say, yes, we can cut a new deal. Here's the deal. I need you to take me to that brother. And they're going, Eric, it's my brother. I'm not taking you. And say, well, I don't need the brother, but you understand he's dangerous. I need his boss, right? Now watch this. I say, you can take me to his boss and I don't need your brother. And the prisoner will go, Eric, if I take you to my brother's boss, the leader, that's my leader. They'll know I did it. They'll kill me, my brother, my whole family. And I say, what do we do? And they'll go, Eric, there's bad guys all through town. There's some across town that you don't even know about. I know where they are. They don't know where I am. Eric, if I lead you to them, they know where my leader is. Can you go from their house straight to my leader's house and capture him? They'll never know it was me.
Wow.
Now, look what just happened here. Look what just happened here, Dominic.
Yeah.
They gave me individuals I wasn't aware of.
Right.
I tell my commander, we're going to go get people I didn't know of here. And then we're going straight to this house over here. We capture more individuals. And guess what? Now I tell my prisoner, I say, I don't need your brother, but I need your brother not to join another group. And the only way I know how to do that is I have to release you. You're going to go home and you tell your brother game's up. Because this crazy American interrogator knows everything about me because he asked me all these questions. He knows where we all live. We cannot hide from him. Go back to your normal job because they can. They can go back to a normal job. They have a normal job. I'm not asking them to leave the government military, enemy military. Just go back to normal life. Game's over. I removed your boss, which was your pressure. Now look what we have. Now we've got one less prisoner. So we have less prisoners, which is good for everyone. I've got a prisoner who's not with the enemy. He's going to go talk his brother out, which they do 100% of the time. And I got additional prisoners I wasn't looking for. And what did I do? I solved his problem. He walked out that door.
Right.
Something I noticed that you did there, which is so powerful, is you actually, as brilliant and as magical as you are, you actually didn't solve the problem. You had him solve the problem for you.
Right.
You asked him, you're like, whoa, how do we solve this?
Brian,
brilliant.
I don't live in Iraq. I don't know his life. I don't know the best way to solve his problems. He does. Now, what I'm asking is for this individual to trust me to get access and awareness of his life, his family, his situation, and not burn him on that. You cannot say, I need you to trust me. You can't say, you better trust me or else. The only way you build that level of trust is when I'm talking to these prisoners, they go, you're interesting, Mr. Interrogator. This is not about you, is it? You truly are trying to figure out how to do this for me. That is what I've discovered in you, Mr. Interrogator. This is about me first. Now that I know that that's where you're coming from, I want to give you all access to everything because you're going to do this for me.
There are very few fields in life where this couldn't seem more implausible.
You're right.
Literally two opposing forces where life and death is on the line, and yet you can find a common ground where you can solve their problem. I wonder, I hope to never be in that situation on either side of the table. And I'm wondering, I think about CEOs, I think about people in negotiations. If we can do it on the battlefield, I know we can do it in the boardroom. And I'm curious now, if we move it from the battlefield to the boardroom, what does that look like? What have you seen in your experiences using these same sort of techniques to find how do I solve your problem?
So that's what I've been doing for the last 9 years, giving presentations about this empathy-based listening to business leaders. And what we've seen is, Eric, that's awesome. It sounds great. I'm going to go do it. But what happens is they'll attempt, but they continue to lean on their agendas, their goals, their fears, and their biases. So the challenge is to say, okay, I've got a commitment. What I have to train and teach is how do we remove those biases, those distractions? That's where we have to do the hardcore training.
So when you see that, what is it that somebody is stuck on that they can't quite release? Like, what is it they don't quite get when they go to do this?
So what happens is, pick an industry. You could say a boss talking to their subordinate, and the boss wants the subordinate to be more productive. And if the boss tells the subordinate, you're doing great, but you see that there's just been a decline in your conversion ratio of prospects to client. And if the subordinate says, well, the problem is I'm struggling to get in front of my prospects because of this pandemic, we're having to do a lot of Zoom calls. The response from the leader should be, tell me about this problem. Within that problem, what is the issue? But instead, it is, well, we've developed some programs to help you learn to communicate over Zoom. So the issue is they identify the initial problem and they go straight to solution.
Yes.
And that's what leaders think. Leaders say, I'm a problem solver. That's what I do.
That's a huge golden nugget here. So what you did on the battlefield wasn't you, all right, Mr. Insurgent, like, here's what we're going to do. You asked and then co-created a solution. And it sounds like a really similar thing that you're doing in the boardroom about how do we solve the problem, as opposed to, great, here's the program and here's the solution. And I got to tell you, as a guy with an ego, it's a really tough thing to do because it feels so fucking good. It feels so good when I'm like, here's the answer. We're going to execute it. I'm going to get credit for it. And so like what you're talking about is beautiful and, in my experience, really tough to do.
Well, and also if we want to talk about heterosexual relationships where, like let's say the woman brings her man a problem and the guy starts, machine gun firing advice and solutions, is one of the fastest ways oftentimes to shut down that dynamic.
That's right.
We had a women's coach on here on our show. Her name is Blair Lindsay. And she said, I had to train my husband that when I brought a problem to him and he didn't know exactly what to do, and his instinct was to go into advice, she trained him to ask this one question: would you want strategy or empathy? So like, that's how he starts his question now. Like, do you want strategy or empathy? Because sometimes she just needs an ear. Sometimes she does need problem solving, but he needs to know which lane to pick first. Otherwise he'll be sleeping on the couch most nights. So this is fascinating stuff, Eric. And what I'm really keen to get into is, okay, like you started discovering this technique of, well, you first started discovering that the Army's interrogation tactics didn't work. You then stumbled upon this, like, well, I'm actually going to use the very thing that these people, these hostages want the most to co-create the solution. So now take us through the journey of you're applying this technique, you're getting valuable information, but Saddam still can't be found. Everyone's exasperated. What happens next?
Great. So, like I said, I arrived in Iraq and was assigned to the Joint Special Operations Command. It's called JSOC. Again, I know a lot of men, your audience, I don't know how much know about the military, the Joint Special Operations Command. Let's just say this. The military, they're awesome. The Joint Special Operations Command, they're the elite. They're the highest end. It's Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, 75th Rangers, and everything they need to succeed at their job. Their number one mission, high value targets. I was sent there because I had an infantry background and I had graduated the Army's Ranger School. Ranger School is a really tough Army school, right? And they said the problem, they were interrogators with the Joint Special Operations Command, but they didn't have former infantry interrogators. And there was this Delta Force team in Tikrit that says, hey, we want an interrogator out here with us going on these raids. So I get plucked doing my Chinese Mandarin intelligence job, get sent out to Tikrit to join this team. So there's my experience, right? I'm coming with kind of this open canvas where I can identify the problem. So when I'm out with this team, they loved the way I did the communications. It started gathering information. We started getting cooperation from prisoners, which led us to targets. Now, when the Delta team went and did the targets and we started going, hey, the information from these prisoners is right. So now we started doing hits to bring in prisoners, and we had the singular goal of just wiping out the bad guys in the Sunni triangle. And I was told, Eric, you're going to this Delta Force team. Saddam Hussein's not up there. This is Saddam Hussein's hometown. It's a little town of 20,000 people of Tikrit in the Sunni triangle. We have 15,000 army people there. We've been through every house. So as I'm gathering trust from these prisoners, I start to realize he's got to be here. This insurgency is so well run and it's so powered. And at the top was this bodyguard of Saddam. I'm like, there's no way a bodyguard running this. He's got to be doing it through Saddam. So my tour's running out, right? I ended up doing 300 interrogations. I'm on a 6-month tour. As my tour's running out, I'm down to 2 weeks. My Delta commander, his name was Bam Bam. Bam Bam said, Eric, if you and I, the only two of us, think that Saddam's here, we've got to find it out in the next 2 weeks because you're leaving. They're not letting you stay because they don't think he's here. And Bam Bam said, and Eric, they've already told me, I'm not even getting a replacement for you.
Okay.
This is such a nothing town that we're not even getting a new interrogator. So we said, we're going to find everybody associated with this bodyguard. And we went to business partners and associates and brothers. And I did this technique, right? And connected. And to the point to where Bam Bam said, Eric, when you get this level of cooperation, don't even take them back to the prison. They're going to live with us. They lived with us in our house, this Delta house on the U.S. compound. And they were locked up, right? They weren't just getting up and making breakfast, but they had the freedom.
Sounds like one of your men's retreats, Dominic.
Yeah, right.
Right?
I lock everybody up at my men's retreat. So this sounds, right.
Exactly like this. Yes.
Go for it.
And with just less than a week to go on my tour, the big break, we finally had one of our prisoners take us to the driver of that bodyguard. When I get the driver, we connected. Took about 6 hours. And the driver says, Eric, this Muhammad Ibrahim, this bodyguard, he gives me millions of dollars every single week. I deliver it throughout the Sunni triangle, and he gives me orders for every attack since this war began. He said, Eric, this bodyguard, Muhammad Ibrahim, my boss, he's taking all orders from Saddam Hussein.
How did you get him to, was it the same tactic, the empathy-based listening and the hope? Like, how did you get him to open up?
We connected. I mean, I did have to start off with if you don't tell me a lie, I'll let you walk out the door.
Yep.
And I busted him in 2 lies. And I think at that point, what he really enjoyed was he's a pretty smart guy. And when he saw me work him that way and didn't know it until I revealed the lies, I think at some point he was like, you're pretty cool, man. I kind of like you. Let's see what we can do here. And when my strategy was, how do I protect you and your family? When I get you out of here, I got to get you out of the country. Everything was about him. And when he saw that, he then took over, really. And he said, here's what we got to do. If we're going to get him. And he said, Eric, you got to hit these houses all at once. He goes, I have 5 safe houses that I drop the bodyguard, Muhammad Ibrahim, off at every single night. He said, I don't know which one he's going to be at night. He'll be at one of them tonight. So we got all 5. Bam Bam says, we're hitting them at once. And we raided all 5 of the locations. My bodyguard wasn't at any of them. So now Bam Bam's like, Eric, you have 4 nights left. We have all these prisoners. I don't even know if these are real safe houses. Here's like 30 prisoners. This driver helped me work with every single one of these prisoners. And they quit. So finally, one of the prisoners says, yes, I was running a safe house. You guys have gotten too close to this bodyguard. You scared him out of town. He just left for this town of Samara. And the prisoner said, in Samara, that bodyguard, his number 1 sub-commander is this guy. He's got to be at that house. Now I go to Bam Bam's. All right, we're tracking. We pushed him to this house. I promise he's there. Bam Bam said, 3 nights left. We're going tonight. We raided that house down in Samara. No bodyguard. The sub-commander's little brother quickly, 20 minutes breaks and said, my brother's the sub-commander in this town of Samara. Muhammad Ibrahim does not come here, but you did scare him to our town. He rented a house 1 block from where you captured me. He's there right now. Bam Bam and the team immediately go to the rental house of my bodyguard, this Muhammad Ibrahim. No bodyguard.
Oh, God.
The bodyguard's 20-year-old son was there. We did capture the 20-year-old son of Muhammad Ibrahim. And Bam Bam brings him quickly back to our house. And Bam Bam tells me, Eric, your flight is leaving tomorrow night. We have
today and tomorrow before you go back to Baghdad. Your tour's up. I bring in the boy. I set him down. I begin the interrogations. It didn't take me long to get a little bit of cooperation. And the boy says, Eric, my dad, Muhammad Ibrahim, was at the house you captured me in 2 hours before you came. He said he left. How would I know where he went? And I'm sitting there thinking, how would any of these prisoners know? Of all the work that we done, I had this bodyguard at this house and we missed him by 2 hours and he's gone. How would anyone actually know where he went? But I told myself, you listen to this boy. You connect with him. He'll give you something. And I started interrogating the 20-year-old son of this bodyguard, Muhammad Ibrahim, and we connected. This boy and I really, and it turned, Dom, from more of a interrogation to what I refer to as a family counseling session, because the 20-year-old son of Muhammad Ibrahim and his dad's relationship wasn't going so well. And the boy starts crying. He's telling me how his dad doesn't love him and doesn't respect him as a man. And I'm like, oh my goodness, can we get through this? And the boy says, I just wish my dad and I would do things that we did when I was little. I said, well, what did you guys used to do? He said, he used to take me fishing. He said, he doesn't take me fishing anymore. And I said, yeah, your dad's in the middle of a war right now. You might want to cut him some slack. And the boy says, no, they still go fishing. He just doesn't take me. And the boy said they still go fishing. I said, where do they go fishing? He said, along the Tigris River. I said, where? He said, Eric, they just built a pond along the Tigris River. They fish next to the pond. And when the boy told me they built a pond, Don, one of the early interrogations I did when I got to Tikrit, we captured the chef of Saddam Hussein. Guy cooked every meal for Saddam for 8 straight years. And he was a cook. He's wide open. He didn't care. He said, Eric, being Saddam's cook's pretty easy. He said, the president, that's what they called Saddam, just likes this fish called mazgoof. He said, I makes the best mazgoof recipe in the world. I'm Saddam Hussein's cook. And when the boy told me they built a fish pond, why are you going to build a fish pond during the middle of a war unless you need to stock the pond for your brutal dictator boss because you can't go to the market and get fish? And I told Bam Bam the whole thing. And Bam Bam said, on your last night, we're raiding a fish pond. I said, Bam Bam, that bodyguard's going to be there. And that night, at midnight, my flight's going back to Baghdad at 2 o'clock in the morning. At midnight, the team raids this fish pond and they built this shack next to it. And Bam Bam and the team go in and they captured these 2 men. And Bam Bam calls back 20 minutes later and he said, Eric, it's nothing. It's 2 fishermen. He said, get all the prisoners from the house. Meet me down at the helicopter pad. Your flight's coming in. I'm bringing these 2 fishermen. And I meet him at the helicopter pad and I load up all my prisoners that have been living with us. And they give me these 2 fishermen and Bam Bam said, do not quit. He said, it's going to be a few days before you leave the country. Don't quit. Get me one more target. I go to Baghdad. They tell me my flight leaves in 3 days. That night I brought in the 2 fishermen. I went back and forth with them. It took me 11 hours, but one of them breaks and tells me I work for Muhammad Ibrahim. I catch fish out of the river. I put it in the pond. He said, Eric, every few days they come and grab fish out of the pond and they leave. I said, where is he? Where's Muhammad Ibrahim? And the fisherman said, Eric, Muhammad Ibrahim's my distant cousin. He said a couple of days ago, they came and got the address of our mutual aunt and uncle in Baghdad. I think he's going to hide at that house in Baghdad. And I got the sketch and the map and I'm thinking, that's awesome. We're in Baghdad. And I called the Bam Bam of Baghdad and said, I need you to do this raid. I'm going after this bodyguard. And the Bam Bam of Baghdad said, we're pretty busy. I'll put it on the list.
Jeez.
That's all I heard.
I mean, I've had bad customer service stories, but come on.
Yeah. And I'm going after this person from Tikrit. Nobody thinks anybody important's into Tikrit. He said he'd put it on the list. The days came and went. My flight's leaving the country at 8 o'clock in the morning on December 13th, 2003. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the Bam Bam of Baghdad calls into the prison, said, Eric, we had a slow night. We did your raid. We didn't get Muhammad Ibrahim. He said, there's 4 prisoners from this house. I'll bring them to you. They bring the 4 people from the house. He points to the homeowner. I get the prisoners at 4 o'clock in the morning. I brought in the homeowner and I told myself, do not rush it. Just listen to him. And I did, Dom. I just listened to this man and it took me an hour until I figured out, wait a second. This man is not from Baghdad. He can't own that house. He's from Tikrit. And then finally at 6 in the morning, I realized this is the deputy under my bodyguard. This is the number 2 guy in my entire link diagram. And he finally breaks and he looks at me and he said, I'm the deputy of Muhammad Ibrahim. And I said, that's awesome. I need you to take me to him. And I'm thinking in my mind, if you can do it in the next 15 minutes, that will be great. The deputy looks at me and he said, Eric, last night when those soldiers came and captured me, he said, Muhammad Ibrahim was sleeping in the bed next to me. They're Delta Force. They don't miss anybody. I said, did they get him? And they don't even know it. And I went to the guards. I said, bring me all the prisoners from any raid last night. And they brought him in, 3 prisoners, hoods over their head, handcuffs behind their back. There were just 3 guys, and they set him on the ground. I start lifting hoods. We did not have a picture of Muhammad Ibrahim, but I knew exactly what he was supposed to look like. My bodyguard was supposed to have a chin like John Travolta.
Yeah, the butt chin. Yeah, the butt chin.
Yeah, that's right. And on the last hood, I lifted up, and I saw that chin, and I knew it was him. I said, you're Muhammad Ibrahim. Man, I've been waiting to meet you. And he looks at me in perfect English. He said, you're the interrogator from Tikrit. He said, I've been waiting to meet you too.
Huh.
Dom, I had 90 minutes. I brought him to the interrogation room. I sat him down and I told myself, do not rush this. Do not force it. Just listen to him. He's going to give you something. I did not know how to break him, but I knew if I would let him take lead and just listen to him, pick up those breadcrumbs of things he needed to talk about, I could get him. I could get something. And I looked at him and I said, the only thing we can talk about is the exact location of Saddam. And he looks at me and he said, you give me way too much credit. He said, the president? That's what they called Saddam. He said, I don't know where he is. And I knew exactly what to say. He said, you give me way too much credit. This guy was a bodyguard. Saddam had hundreds of bodyguards. Why him? Saddam Hussein's bodyguards were thugs, right? They used their power of working close and near Saddam against the public for their own benefits. Every single one of them, they were feared and hated by the public except for Muhammad Ibrahim. Muhammad Ibrahim was a fun-loving, whiskey-drinking, domino-playing bodyguard. He did not have an enemy in the world. Saddam Hussein is extremely smart. When the United States invaded the country, Saddam knew about the deck of cards, and he made everybody on the deck of cards leave his hometown of Tikrit. That's why we never found anybody on the deck of cards in Tikrit. That's why no one thought Saddam was there. He also made all these bodyguards that people hated to leave because he knew these locals would come to the American soldiers and say, hey, I know where that bodyguard is because I don't like him, and go get him. And if that bodyguard knew where Saddam was, Saddam's in trouble. He pushed everyone out of town except for Muhammad Ibrahim, and then required Muhammad Ibrahim to get the entire group to run his insurgency, to be his link of communication. And I looked at the bodyguard and I said, I didn't give you any credit. I did not know who you were before I came to this country. I said, but the 300 prisoners I've interrogated, the 40 of your family members that I have in this prison right now, that he forced you to get involved in this insurgency, they give you credit. They give you credit for ruining their lives. And he looks and he kind of rolls his eyes, but he wasn't rolling eyes at me. He was rolling his eyes at Saddam and holding on this piece of information. I knew if I get in front of Muhammad Ibrahim and I had the moment, I could deliver the piece of information. I looked at him and I said, your wife had a baby 3 months ago. And he didn't know I knew about that baby. I said, your wife and that baby are living at this house in Tikrit. And he was shocked. And I said, I never sent the soldiers to that house. I said, it's a kilometer from the base. Where else are you going to go to find someone other than their spouse? And I never sent the soldiers to that house because that baby would not have survived that raid. But I would never do anything to hurt that baby. I said, what will he do for you? What will he do for any of them now? And I finally got him. His tears are running down his eyes. And he's like, I don't know if I should do it. He didn't say he couldn't do it. He's like, I don't know if I should do it. And I'm thinking, I think you should. I really do. I think you should. And it's 7:45 in the morning. The interrogators come in. They're like, you got to go, man. Your flight's leaving. And I looked at the prisoner. I said, I need it now. He said, I can't. And I'm walking into a cell. I got to go. Dom, I am leaving. And I said, you are going to change your mind. I'm not kidding. This isn't a joke. I'm leaving. Nobody knows what you can do. Nobody thinks he's up there but you and me. When you change your mind, no one's going to come talk to you. And I said, listen, you're going to change your mind. I'm going to be gone. When you change your mind, go nuts. I said, you got to go nuts. Bang on the wall, scream, yell, make somebody come talk to you. They're never going to give you a shot. They don't know you can do this. And I put him in his cell and I left and I packed my bags. And a few minutes later, they're driving me across the tarmac. I'm going to my flight. I'm leaving. And the senior interrogator looks at me and he said, what'd you do to that prisoner? I said, I didn't do anything to him. Why? He goes, guards are worried. He's freaking out. He won't stop banging his head against the walls of his cell. I knew he busted. I knew he broke. And I jumped out. I told him to hold the flight, ran across the tarmac, grabbed Muhammad Ibrahim out of his cell, brought him into the interrogation room, lifted up his hood. And I said, where is he? And he looks at me and he said, Eric, we got to go. I said, where are we going? He said, we're going back to Tikrit. He said, is it this farmhouse in this village called Adwar at the house of a man named Qais named Jassim? We got the sketch and the map. And he said, Eric, we got to go now. And the interrogators are back for me. And I told him, I said, my guy broke. They said, man, go get on the plane. I said, you don't understand. They said, you don't understand. Saddam Hussein's not in Tikrit. Go get on the daggum plane. And I gave him the sketch and the map. And I said, please call Bam Bam. Tell him Muhammad Ibrahim's dying to take him to Saddam. And I gave him that information and I left. They put me on the plane, and when you're at this task force, you don't just go home. They fly you to Doha, Qatar, the headquarters of the Joint Special Operations Command, because you got to give a top secret out briefing just to leave the country. And the next morning, I show up for my out brief, and they knock on this door, and the senior officer opens up, and he pokes his head out, and he just says, all briefings today are canceled. Plunk. And the sergeant knocks on the door, and he said, Staff Sergeant Maddox can't leave the country until he gives his briefing. And the senior officer looks at me and he pulls me inside the door and he said, you're Eric Maddox? I said, yes. He said, Eric, briefings are canceled. We got him. We got him last night. I said, how'd they go down? And he said, when you left, we called Bam Bam. And Bam Bam and the entire Delta Force team in Tikrit got on a helicopter, flew to Baghdad, picked up Muhammad Ibrahim, escorted him back to our house, planned and executed the raid of the farmhouse, Qais named Jassim. And they could not find Saddam. They looked for an hour, and after an hour, Bam Bam goes to the truck, pulls out the bodyguard, cuts off his handcuffs, lifts off his hood, and he said, where is he? And the bodyguard asked Bam Bam to hold his hand. And then the bodyguard stopped talking, and he just said, follow me. And they walked around the back side of the house. He doesn't say anything. He turns to the team and he's looking them in the eye and he starts kicking his feet and he's digging up the sand with his feet. And they realized he kicked up a rope, the end of a rope, and they moved him aside and they started digging. This rope was connected to a lid and they cleared it off and they had their weapons drawn and they look at the bodyguard and he's sitting there just nodding his head frantically going, he won't say anything. And they reached down and they lifted up the lid. And they were staring at him. Saddam Hussein. And he broke. He was captured by the one guy he trusted to never, ever give up his location.
Yeah, I remember that image, man, when they pulled Saddam out of that hole. Eric, what was it that you think made Muhammad break? Was it that you said that you showed more value over the life of his child, his newborn child, than Saddam would have? Was that the thing that was most important to him?
So I think it's a combination of things. I think obviously there's fatigue in that position. I think he saw the inevitability that the United States wasn't going anywhere. I think he really was frustrated at Saddam Hussein. And I'm very proud of that interrogation because there's an energy of confidence and positivity that I know I exude when I communicate with people. And the key is that nothing about this conversation was, do it for me, do it for me, do it for me. It was, I cannot help you until we do this. This is your shot at help. And so when you take on the role as servant, advocate, champion for a prisoner, you're allowed to yell. You're allowed to scream. You're allowed to get frustrated. They know it's for them. And that allows all your energy to come. And when you give somebody that, rarely in people's lives do somebody communicate with them completely for their benefit. And that, I know, is what pushed him across.
Eric, you mentioned a couple times in telling this story, which, by the way, we need a diagram for and a map. I would love to see that. But you mentioned a couple times this idea of telling yourself, don't rush it. Don't rush it. And I know in conversations I've had with friends, family, colleagues before, I can feel that urge come up. And I want to just whack them in the head. I want to get the thing done and I want to move forward. And so I think maybe even to a lesser degree, I understand that, like, why you might tell yourself that. And I'm curious, how do you either suppress that or how do you know that that's there, that urge to just like finish this right now?
Brian, that's one of the best questions anyone can ask me, right? Because it directly applies to what I believe in. I believe you must communicate to demonstrate that I'm putting you ahead of me. Now, the rushing and communication comes when we're listening to someone, even if we want to help them, we'll listen to a little bit on the surface, maybe even a layer deep and go, I know the solution for you. But when we do that, think if you rush to solution, even if you're correct, you say, I don't want to spend a bunch of time with you. I want to get this solved so we can move on. I don't really care about you. I just need to get through this problem. Or we're also, and this is really typical, many people, especially men, love to solve problems. That's how we identify ourselves. We get this ego boost by solving a problem. So we see if somebody shares a problem, now they're sharing from themselves. But when we take it to give our awesome solution, it just says, I'm using you to feed my ego, and they know it. But when you stay with them, that's what I mean by don't rush it. Don't rush to your solution. Discover, show you're with them, show you're interested, show you're smart enough. I don't even use the word care. I've never cared about a single prisoner I've ever interrogated. I do not care if they die within 5 minutes after I talk to them. I don't, but they don't need me to care. They need me to understand. They don't need my sympathy. I will even argue that when you get emotions involved of care or hate or love, you really get distorted from the information that gives you clarity of understanding to actually help them.
Eric, this is a really important distinction because I know you hammer home trust, right? Like they need to trust you. How is it that they're able to trust you so deeply to give up lifelong allegiances without needing you to care?
Okay, check this out. This is the most important thing I can say ever on my message. This world of people, we are all the lead character in our own movies. We are walking around this world and each of us is on center stage of our movie, but we want other people to be on our stage, yet they're center stage of their movie. And it's this conflict where we try to pretend like I'm on your stage, but really I'm on mine. This whole thing comes down to, I'm going on your stage. I'm leaving my stage. I'm going on your stage and I'm going to be the co-star you've never had. And that is the ultimate level of trust. It doesn't matter if I care about them. It's that I'm going on their stage seeking to understand what they need during their movie, during their play. Anything else is secondary to trust because of the self-human nature. Because of that, this overbearing need for all of us to think about ourselves, look at our own goals, look at our own agendas. When you can overcome that, you're basically saying, you know what level of trust I'm bringing you? I'm putting you ahead of me, and everything else is so secondary to that level.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, man. We have to ask the question, what did it feel like for you when you found out that you had directly uncovered the information that captured Saddam Hussein? What did it mean for you that day, and what has it meant for you in the nearly 2 decades that have followed?
It was the happiest moment of my life. I have 5 children. I just really wish I could say, oh no, people always say it was the birth of my child. They were supposed to be born. They were supposed to be healthy. So that was the most relieving moments when my children were born. But I'm going to be straight up. That was the happiest moment of my life. That, and when I realized the lady who's now my wife liked me and loved me, I'm like, that's probably the second happiest moment. I'm like, those 2 things where we got over that edge of, I think she likes me. We just got Saddam Hussein. When the officer pulled me in and said, we got him, I really felt like my body elevated to the ceiling and I was just looking down on everything. I've never had that feeling before and I've never had it after, but it was fantastic. It was this moment where I could go, yes, something fun. Because people always say, Eric, what was your best day in Iraq? I said, I never had a good day in Iraq. And the day after I left was awesome.
Eric, the story you told is long over a period of time. There's a lot of pressure. In those moments, now we all know when you started telling the story here on this podcast that Saddam Hussein was caught. And we had the idea of looking down in the hole. And so we kind of knew the outcome. But when you were going through this, you didn't know. You didn't know for sure you were ever going to catch him. Like in those moments, are there moments of doubt? Are there moments of like, how do you keep going when you're not sure if you're going in the right direction?
So I'm not kidding, Brian. You asked the best questions. So check this out. I never thought we were going to find Saddam. Never. I never quit. I had perseverance, right? I don't have perseverance, but I have two things. A, I have hope. Well, it's not because I was born with hope or had parents that created hope in my mindset. I have the ability to make a mistake and not look at that mistake and go, darn it, but look at that mistake and go, is there something that we can say that we were at least close? What did we do that we can do better next time so that will not happen again? So it's that self-critique, self-evaluation to find a glimmer of hope, to give you the energy to move forward. But the other thing that was most important was my mindset. I didn't need to find Saddam Hussein. It was not my goal. I had a greater, longer-term goal. The most important thing for me, I joined the military. I enlisted with a college degree. I am not your typical Army guy. I don't go hunting. I don't have guns. I'm not into the Army. I was supposed to be a banker or a lawyer or something like that, but I enlisted and I spent my 20s enlisted and deep into my 30s. And I felt like it was this waste of time unless I could prove myself. So all these years of all this training, I'm like, man, I've wasted my life. And I watched my friends get rich and have businesses and get wives because I married later in life, right? And because I couldn't live this normal life, I said, the one thing is if I ever go to war, I'm giving it everything I have every day, every moment. That's the only thing I've got because when I'm 80, I need my grandchildren to be able to go, did you go to war? And I say, yes. And I gave it all I had. Brian, I didn't need to find Saddam Hussein. I just need to give everything I have every single day. And when you can set a goal that's above these immediate goals, your immediate goals are going to happen.
You know, what you're saying here, Eric, is so important that it's not about achieving an outcome, which in many cases you can't control, right? But the thing that you can control is your effort, right? Controlling being able to answer that question when your grandkids ask you, did you give it your all? Yes, every single day. And if you give it your all every single day, there is no wasted day. Like you said, there are the mistakes, but there's no failure. There's no permanency to that. It's just a temporary setback, right? And a lot of guys, myself included, for many years of my life, it was always about outcome orientation. And when it was outcome orientation, I found myself giving up more quickly on things, getting frustrated more quickly on things. But when it came to, am I fully engaged in my life? Am I living a life that I'm proud of? Am I showing up in the best version of myself, or at least attempting to each day? That is what leads to a successful life. And some of these extraordinary things, like you said, you never expected to capture Saddam Hussein, but you have helped to put away one of the greatest villains of our lifetime. And that's extraordinary work, man.
Thank you.
So Eric, truly a remarkable accomplishment and a service to humanity, obviously our country as well. What has it been like over the last 17 or 18 years after such heroic efforts of you and obviously all the others that were involved in the capture of Saddam? What's your life been like, and what is it that you are doing and speaking about these days?
It's been an exciting 17 years. So right after the capture of Saddam, the United States Department of Defense Intelligence Agency loved my interrogation technique, and they created a 30-person civilian interrogation team. I was hired as the first civilian, and I taught this technique. I ended up doing 8 deployments, 2,700 interrogations. So I really got to go and say, let's really figure out how this works best in every situation. The next 10 years were travel, going to battlefields, teaching interrogations, doing interrogations. I then started giving keynote speeches to private companies, business leaders. And from there, they said, that's awesome. We want to be able to do it. So now I've developed an empathy-based listening, communication training program. And it's really simple. I say, I'm going to teach you to be a better listener in order for you to build trust in relationships, to gain maximum influence, to get people to do what you want them to do. And that's how I spend my days. I did 102 keynote speeches in 2020. I know you're a wealth manager. I trained over 20,000 wealth managers in 2020. And any area where trust is so important to win clients, create advocates and champions. And that's what we do.
That's awesome, Eric. So if any organization is like a sales organization or a client-facing organization, those probably be the places where you do a lot of speaking for and a lot of consulting for.
It is. We have 5 primary sectors: wealth management, banking, insurance, accounting, and real estate. Those are the areas. And if anybody needs to get a hold of me, I'm at ericmaddox.com or info@ericmaddox.com, on our website of ericmaddox.com.
I'm going to link that in the show notes. Eric, thank you for such an inspiring story. Again, thank you for your service to our country and to humanity. We're definitely going to have to bring you back in some capacity for our audience in the masterminds and our Facebook group. I know we've already talked about that offline, and I think it'd be a great opportunity for our listeners who have listened to this show to come on and ask you some of their own deeper probing questions. And since Brian has set the standard for the best questions, our listeners, you're going to have some time to step up and see if you can get that same kind of reaction out of Eric. So bring your best. Eric, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Brian.
Wow. Gentlemen, was that not one of the most riveting and captivating stories that you've ever heard on this podcast? It is now time to take some of what you have learned from Eric Maddox and his empathy-based listening skills and deploy that in your life, whether it's within the businesses that you lead, in the communities that you're a leader in your family, in your romantic relationships. What is the one insight? What is the one technique? What is the one aha that you are going to take away and implement in your life? And as always, you're invited to head over to the Facebook group, the Great Man Within Facebook podcast group, and share some of your stories, your insights, and what you're going to be taking away. We'll see you in the discussion there.